Well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today. Hello? Hello?
The Groundhog Day trope comes from the film of the same name, where weatherman Phil Connors is stuck living the same day over and over again until he grows beyond the egocentric version of himself that we initially meet him as in Act 1 of the film. It is within the repetition of the loop day that our protagonist is confronted with the imperfect being that they are, and therefore develop and grow. As Groundhog Day screenwriter Danny Rubin said during a panel at the Austin Film Festival,
and what I thought was interesting was just the process of repetition caused him to go through these big changes in the way he looked at his life. And that included his coming around to losing his ego and starting to notice other people and trying to join civilization instead of prove himself to it or something like that.
Today we'll be looking at Happy Death Day and what we can learn from its structure if you wanted to write your own version of a Groundhog Day. At the beginning of your narrative, your protagonist starts with a strong and dominant ego. It is not necessarily that this is a wholly negative trait, but it is something which is holding them back from becoming a fully actualized version of themselves. This is then accompanied by a powerful ego defense, which is stopping them from growing beyond the person that they are at the moment when the audience first meet them. During Act 1 of the piece, the audience see your protagonist wearing a large suit of medieval armour. Not only does this protect them from all the potential pain that they may experience in the outside world, but it is also something that they are proud of wearing. Everything about the ordinary world which your protagonist inhabits allows for them to exist in this egocentric state. For example, in Happy Death Day, Tree is deceitful, ungrateful, spiteful, and appears to be proud of some of her more questionable behaviours. As the number 2 in her sorority, she is there as an enforcer of the status quo, and is happy to fulfil this role and enjoy the privileges that it affords her. All of these things assist in keeping people at arm's length away from her, so that she doesn't have to form lasting and meaningful relationships. As the narrative progresses, this defense that your protagonist has in place is gradually weakened, and then finally broken down. During their journey in the adventure world, your protagonist will transition through 4 stages of change. These are physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, with each of them becoming increasingly harder for them to navigate through without discarding a piece of this armour. Currently though, your protagonist is not stuck in their loop, or is unaware that they are in it, and therefore has not transitioned into an adventure world. However, their call to adventure comes and they are now thrust into an adventure world, or have an understanding that this is where they were stuck when we first met them. Importantly for us, they transition into Act 2, where they begin to physically change. This place is the antithesis of somewhere where our protagonist's ego can exist comfortably, and their previous defences are now a hindrance to them. If we continue with the analogy of the suit of armour, this section of the narrative is akin to our protagonist being thrown into a pool, where this armour is now dragging them to the bottom, where they will drown. In order to survive and reach the surface of the water, where they can breathe again, they have to begin to remove this armour. However, in the beginning they will only sacrifice the superficial parts, as they still don't believe that it is that much of a problem for them to keep it on. In a Groundhog Day, this transition must take our protagonist into the worst day possible for them. With Tree in Happy Death Day, this is initially represented by her waking up in the dorm room of a nerdy guy who she doesn't know the name of. Importantly though, it is also her birthday, which we will come to learn has a huge amount of significance to the relationship that she has with her family. Our protagonists realise that something strange is going on, and start to come to terms with the fact they are stuck in a loop. Initially, they will attempt to solve the problem that they face in the most direct way possible, which involves doubling down on their egocentric identity in the face of the challenge to it. In Happy Death Day, Tree, after the initial shock of waking up in the same day and changing some superficial physical behaviours, continues to betray her sorority sister and act in the same way that she did on her first navigation of the loop. However, eventually they must accept that they are stuck in this loop and have to begin to invest in their journey, first by trying increasingly extreme measures to alter their physical route that they take through the day, in the hope of escaping it. At one point, Tree even barricades herself in her room in an attempt to make sure that the murderer can't get to her. However, all of these attempts to thwart the loop fail, and she is doomed to repeat the same day over and over. In frustration, our protagonists realise that they have to try something different, and move to Act 3, where they emotionally invest in their development. In a Groundhog Day narrative, this usually comes in their interaction with their mentor figure, who they have met during their initial transition into the adventure world, but have yet to fully acknowledge. In Tree's case, this is Carter, the guy whose dorm she has been waking up in at the beginning of each of her loops. In a similar way to the adventure world, Carter is the antithesis of the kind of people that Tree is used to hanging around with. The interactions that she has with Carter allows for her to start further removing the pieces of armor on the journey to defeat her ego. He assists her in trying to understand the emotional relationship that she has with her birthday, which she is in the process of trying to run away from. Offering up his assistance, he tries to get her to examine the connections that she has with those around her, and gets her to reassess some of the more damaging assumptions that she has about herself and her behaviour. This culminates in her outlining a list of suspects who might be trying to kill her, which also has her reflect upon her past actions and how they have impacted those around her. Believing that she has done enough to break the loop, Tree also hits the midpoint of the narrative and enacts her easy plan of trying to tick off the list of those who she thinks might be her killer. However, each and every one of them is wrong, and the stakes are now raised as we begin to understand that there aren't unlimited loops that Tree has for her to be able to complete her mission. She has her "I've only got so many of these left in me" moment when she visits the hospital and understands the damage that the situation is doing to her body. Tree then learns that simply emotionally understanding that there is something missing in her life isn't enough, and she moves into Act 4, where she can start to explore her psychology. During this act, our protagonists must dig deeper into their vulnerabilities, and they are now the most exposed that they have ever been, having lost so much of their armor along the way to this point. In the diner scene in Happy Death Day, Tree opens up about her mother and the fractured relationship that she has with her father. Furthermore, during this act, she understands the key message of all Groundhog Days.
No, it's funny. You relive the same day over and over again. You kind of start to see who you really are.
This revelation, coupled with a greater understanding of who the killer might be, propels her into her one last day, where Tree has to finally try and put her demons to rest and confront her ego head on. She is able to use all of the knowledge that she has gained in the adventure world to assist people who in the beginning she either ignored or went out of her way to hurt. In healing herself, she is now able to heal those around her and begin assisting others in tearing down their own ego defenses. However, this is nothing compared to the final battle, which will require her to discard the part of her armor that she is proudest of, or holding on to the tightest. This is the hardest for her to get rid of, but once she has found the strength to do so, she will be able to surface, reborn as a new and better person. For Tree, this is attending the meal with her father, and finally admitting her vulnerabilities, and exposing the truth about the hurt that her mother's death has caused her. In purging herself of her neuroses, she is now finally able to at least partly let go of it. With her inner journey complete, she is now able to attempt to finish her external journey. However, in order to fulfill the conventions of the horror genre, in this instance of the Groundhog Day, there is a false resolution before the true one. Now with the killer dealt with, we transition into Act 5, where Tree is able to spiritually transform. Here, Tree exhibits the traits which she has been cultivating since first challenged to grow when she entered the adventure world and the Groundhog Day loop, and is able to showcase her spiritual acceptance of her new self. She also importantly looks back at her old life and the egocentric being that she was during Act 1 with disdain. This is necessary for her to understand how far she has come since we have first met her. She is then rewarded for changing, with the promise of a new and exciting life outside of the loop. Until she wakes up in the sequel. So, what can we take away from Happy Death Day when writing our own version of A Groundhog Day? Create a protagonist who at the beginning of your narrative is entirely egocentric, with a strong armor of ego defense to protect them, surrounded by an ordinary world which facilitates their neurotic and self-destructive behavior. Have their loop as an adventure world which forces them to slowly strip away their ego defenses, in order to expose their deeply rooted neuroses and vulnerabilities, which they then exercise in their last push towards their one final day sequence. Create a sequence during Act 5 where your protagonist is able to showcase the transformation that they have been through during their adventure, and are also able to look back on the egocentric being that they were in the beginning of Act 1.